National Center. I am actually based out here in LA. I'm the only person that's on the West Coast, and I work remotely. The majority of my team is in Texas and the Washington, D.C. area. Before I get started, raise your hand if you have heard of NCMEC before yesterday, because I know Susan did the keynote. Okay, so a few people. Raise your hand if you are in education. Okay, who's that? Raise your hand if you are in child welfare. Okay, victim services. Okay, great. All right, anyone just here is a concerned person, human? I guess we all are,
yeah,
right?
We can see that.
We're here because we're all concerned, right? Okay, it's helpful to see who's in the room. Actually, since we're such a small group, could you all just go around and just really quickly tell me your first name and then what is your role within your agency? Oh yeah, I used to run groups with kids, so I like things interactive. I like telling people about that. And you gave me a really dirty look, so we can start on the side.
Sorry, I'm Luna. I'm a school counselor K-8 in Santa Ana.
Okay.
My name's Aubriana. I'm a student at American Indian College.
My name is Ashley Kane, and I'm the Human Trafficking Youth Coordinator with Family Services in Tulare County. I work with at-risk youth and youth trafficking at SESA. Awesome.
My name is Lisa Shea. I'm an occupational therapist who works with special education students.
My name is Kristen Caird. I am a part-time PE aide in an elementary school, and I'm looking to go get my PsyD.
My name is Deirdre Hill. I work for the Orange County Department of Education with youth development programs and rural prevention.
Okay, great. Everybody's just saying what their role is within their agency and their first name.
Okay, I'm Ruby Hanchett, and I am an adjunct professor here as I teach on human trafficking. And I'm also a trustee of a school district, so I have a lot of interest in bringing more awareness to our schools.
Great.
My name's Aquila. I'm a student at American Indian College.
Okay. All right. Well, I love this is a good mix of folks in the room with different, really important roles, but different roles in the lives of children. So, thank you all for being here. I always like to start off by just, obviously you guys are at this human trafficking conference. They've been talking about online exploitation for 2 days, but I still always like to give everybody a heads up that I am going to be talking about child sexual abuse. And although I'm not going to show anything graphic or explicit, I'm still talking about the sexual abuse of children. So if you need a break, you need to step out, it's completely understandable. Please take care of yourselves after this. And after this conference, please don't forget the self-care because it's a lot, it's heavy. So for folks who are not as familiar with the National Center, we're a nonprofit organization and we're based our headquarters is in Alexandria, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. And we have regional offices in New York, Texas, and Florida, but most of our staff is based in in the D.C. area. And we are essentially a resource center and clearinghouse for cases of missing and exploited children. And so just a really quick little bit about our origin story. In the late 70s and early 80s, there were several high-profile child abduction and murder cases all around the country, which really led to our creation. So at that time, there was very little coordination between local and federal law enforcement. For example, and Susan didn't give this example, okay, because I missed the beginning part of her thing history. At that time, if your car was stolen out of, let's say, Costa Mesa, and you reported it stolen and showed up in Vegas, and police ran the tags, they'd be able to see this is a stolen vehicle from another state. But there was no such entry for a missing child. And so the coordination just wasn't there, working together, communicating all of that. And these families, their kids are going missing. This is scary stuff, right? They're terrified. They have no idea what to do. There's nobody to hold their hand. They're having to figure it all out on their own. And they didn't want anybody else to go through this. So they came together. Some of the cases you probably heard of are the Atlanta child murders, where over the course of 3 years, close to 30 young Black boys were abducted and murdered out of the city of Atlanta. Jacob Wetterling out of Minnesota. Patz out of New York. Adam Walsh out of South Florida. So Adam's parents, John and Reve, all these families were doing a lot of advocacy and getting attention on their cases on their own. And they were coming together, but they kind of led the charge to really push Congress to fund a national nonprofit organization that can serve as this support system to people hopefully ultimately prevent this from happening at all, but also make sure everybody's talking to each other. And that there's like one place where tips can come in and information can come in, and it's disseminated to the right people who are working these cases. So that's really how we came about. We have 15 congressionally funded programs, so we have a lot of programs that we work on. And that's not all we do, like we have privately funded programs too. Our mission is to find missing children, reduce sexual exploitation, and prevent future victimization, and we believe that every single child deserves a safe childhood. Our tagline used to be "Hope is why we're here," and I still kind of prefer that because, like, I feel like and you all in this, just working with kids, right? Like, there's a lot of like bad stuff we see and hear about every single day, but we have hope. We're here. We're showing up every day because we believe that kids deserve more and that they can be successful, and that we want to create an environment where they're supported and they can thrive. And I truly, truly believe that. And I feel like everybody I work with is like that too. So I'm not going to go through all of our programs because it would take me like 2 days. And I'm just going to jump right in. I'm really going to be focusing on the child sexual exploitation side and then our prevention resources and like the messaging around that. So before I jump into the exploitation side, I always like to kind of plug in a few things. One, that if you guys have ever gotten an Amber Alert on your phone, that's us. We help with that secondary distribution. If you, especially folks who are working in the school system, if you have kids who are not showing up for school, so from the education side, you might be looking at them as truant, right? They're skipping school. We want to be asking more questions. We want to know what's going on and really advocating to figure out, has this kid, are they missing? Have they run away from home, from their placement? And pushing and advocating that whoever their guardian is reporting them missing to law enforcement and to NCMEC so that we can help recover that kid and hopefully prevent them from going missing again. So we have a lot of resources around that and a lot of supports. Our hotline is where guardians and law enforcement can make reports of missing children. This is also where anybody can call and just get information, report a tip. If you lose my contact information, you can call the hotline and be like, I talked to this girl in California. She said something about prevention, and they would know to like route you to me. It's also, we do get reports of exploitation to the hotline as well. So it's kind of like the phone version. Like if somebody doesn't want to fill out the cyber tip line form online, the web form, they can also call to make a cyber tip line report. So reducing child sexual exploitation. I don't know why I get those slides like that. So I think Susan went over this a little bit yesterday. I'm just going to kind of quickly just summarize that. When we have two main programs at NCMEC on the exploitation side. One is our national cyber tip line. That's what I'm going to talk about first. And that's basically where anybody can report any kind of suspected child sexual exploitation. When they go to make their report, these are the categories they can choose from. Top 3 categories are child sexual abuse materials. That's about 99% of what we're getting, which is still legally referred to as child pornography, but we never use that terminology. And then online enticement, which I think Susan talked about yesterday, is when somebody's reaching out to someone they believe is a child online and trying to get them to send sexual content, have a sexual conversation, or meet offline. And then trafficking is the 3rd highest reported category. But still, the majority of what we're seeing is suspected CSAM. But these are the categories that people can choose from. Do you guys have any questions about any of the categories that are on here? So this is child sexual abuse that's facilitated by the internet, and like Susan said this yesterday, and I always feel like I have to repeat it over and over again, is like we have to stop looking at this as a separate issue from child abuse. She mentioned it yesterday. I'm going to share some data that, it's often somebody that the kid trusts that's the one that's hurting them this way, right? It's not different. What's different about it is, what's unique about it is actually the additional layers of trauma, right? Because especially when we're talking about child sexual abuse materials, we're talking about there's some type of documentation of that abuse. So there's photos, videos. So in addition to that hands-on abuse that that child has experienced, they're also walking through the world wondering who else has witnessed that abuse, right? So, and if it's still out there, if people are still viewing it, if people are finding pleasure in it. So there's all these additional layers of trauma. So it is child sexual abuse, but with some additional layers of trauma to it. So I'm going to talk about some of her data. So I know she shared our data from the 2023 number, where now is over 36 million reports of suspected child sexual exploitation. I'm going to stick with 2022 because the other data slides I'm going to share are all from 2022. I don't have the 2023 data yet for that stuff. That'll probably be released at the end of March. But we get a lot of reports. Majority of these reports, like 90% of them, are result outside of the US. But that's still a lot that have a US nexus, right? And then also about 99% of them are coming from what we call electronic service providers and internet service providers. So these are basically like the online platforms. It could be like a Facebook, a Verizon, Google, Microsoft. If they're based in the United States, they are federally mandated to report to NCMEC if there's suspected exploitation on their platforms. So that's part of the reason why the number is so high, because there is a federal mandate.
Did you say the majority are created outside of the United States?
They have they're resolved outside of the US. So like the perpetrator or the victim is outside of the US.
Uh-huh. So of the studies, when you find out like where that child was when the image was taken, they're mostly not US citizen kids, is what you're saying? They're from outside of the United States?
I can't answer that question. I don't know the answer.
Huh.
I think it's the perpetrators are typically outside of the US. But, because usually when we're getting cyber tip line information, we're getting more information about the perpetrator, but I don't quote me on that because I'm not sure. It could be, basically when we're sending it to law enforcement, so every single report that comes in, Susan went over this yesterday. So if somebody makes a report to the cyber tip line, we get it, and we have analysts that look at every single report, and they try to add value to it. So what that means is they're trying to find as much information as possible about whatever has been reported. So if there's typically a perpetrator that's been reported. They're trying to find as much. They're really, really good at finding information online. I always make the comparison, like, you know, when you're taking that brain break from work and you're like, I'm gonna go on Instagram for like 5 minutes and then I'll go back to what I was doing. And then it's like 45 minutes later and you're looking at like your high school friends, cousins, sons, and you're like, how did I get here? Yeah. So they do that, but with intention. And it's all publicly available information, which also goes to show like people are not good with their privacy settings, right? So they put it in a report and they send that to law enforcement. Every state has an Internet Crimes Against Children task force, an ICAC. California, because we're massive, we have 5. So some states have multiple, but every state has at least one. It's a true federal and local partnership. So for example, the one that's the LA ICAC goes like all the way down to, it's like Ventura County all the way down to San Diego has like their own, but there's some like jurisdictions, like some cities kind of in between that's part of San Diego's ICAC, but it's a really large ICAC, LA ICAC. LAPD is like the host agency. They're the ones that like get the funding for it, and they sit in HSI's building. So there's people from HSI that are part of it, and then they have people from Orange County, from San Bernardino, from like all these surrounding counties that are also a part of it that are affiliates. So we send it to them. They then will determine what they're going to investigate. NCMEC doesn't make that decision; they'll ICACs do, based on the information they have available, and then they will either take it themselves or they'll send it to one of the smaller agencies that they're working with their affiliates. So when I say that 90% of them have a nexus outside the US, we're sending them outside of the US to be investigated. Does that make sense? So they're not going to LAICAC necessarily, they're going to whatever country we believe has the jurisdiction over the crime that's happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just wasn't sure if it's more, the perpetrators, like, I mean, we know kids in developing nations oftentimes are exploited in their poverty, so it's like, are those images and videos being created in other places and then consumed in the United States? Or is...
I mean, that happens. I don't know what the breakdown is, actually. And that's a good question. I can ask that.
Yeah.
Because the information that we have about victims actually comes from our child victim identification program, which, but I put this slide in, but I guess I didn't. So that's our second program on the exploited side. So that's our clearinghouse function. So we send a cyber tip, let's say to LA ICAC. They investigate, they go to bad person's house, and they find 10,000 images across all their devices, okay? So they will then do their own forensics workup and try to see if they can identify the children that are being victimized in the imagery. And then they will send NCMEC that information. They'll let us know, they'll send us all the images, and then they'll also let us know, you know, who the victims are that they're able to identify, and let us know if there's any victims that they were not able to identify. And so then that goes into our system. So then we try to help identify those unidentified victims. But also, if there's another agency that's working a case involving the same perpetrator or any of the same victims, as they get information, they send it to us. We can hopefully help identify those victims, but also make sure that the agencies are talking to each other. So like if the Virginia ICAC is working a case that LA ICAC has already worked involving the same perpetrator or the same victim, then we'll be like, hey, you need to talk to them. And then we can help with like victim impact statements, getting victim support, different types of support services. We help with like, they can opt to like sign up for like notifications if their images pop up in other cases, things like that. We can assist with helping them navigate all of that. So that's on our child victim identification side. So I'm going to share some slides that are based on that information. So these are children that we've been able to that have been identified that are in our system. Now this is going to be a subcategory. Susan mentioned this group. It's what we call actively traded. So you know that old notion of like once something is out on the internet, it's out there forever and that's it, you can't do anything about it. So that's not entirely 100% true anymore. We have a lot of advancements in technology where if we get in front of it, we can actually be very proactive and preventing it from circulating and staying online and getting it taken down quickly. But once it gets sucked into that vortex, and the image I always have is this tornado, so once it gets sucked into the eye of the tornado, it's much more difficult to get it taken down. About 11% of those children are what we call actively traded. So we've seen them 5 or more times, 5 or more reports. Okay, so the data I'm going to share is that small subset of those identified victims in our system. So we wanted to know who's abusing them, who are these exploiters, and we found that over 63% of the time it's somebody who's in their circle of trust. So somebody who has that direct access to them. This is in line with what we know about child abuse. So again, it's not a separate thing. This is somebody who the kid already trusts, parent, guardian, family member, somebody who's in a position of authority and power over them. So it's in line with what we already know. I didn't do it on this slide, but normally I do, so online enticement and self-production are not included in that, okay? Online enticement, remember, is somebody has reached out to that kid, gotten them to send them content. We don't include that in that 63% number, but I want us to take a second and think about, when a kid sends an image to somebody, a sexual image, do you think that they see them as a stranger? Probably not, right? I'm not saying young people don't do that, right? It happens, but most of the time, if you're gonna send something so vulnerable, you're gonna send it to somebody you trust, right? And so that young person sees whoever it is that they've sent that content to as somebody that they trusted. So even though that's not like officially in their circle of trust, from that child's perspective, it is. And from, even more importantly, from a prevention perspective, if we're talking about don't talk to strangers online, this kid doesn't see this person as a stranger. I've been talking to them every day for 2 months. They're not a stranger, they're my best friend. Go ahead.
And that's, and to your point, that's why, because that's what I was wondering, online enticement unknown to child, that's why they're separated, because online enticement, there's a level of trust there that they know them on a certain level.
Yeah, I wouldn't, it's like an unestablished relationship. So here it's like a photographer, maybe the child has like run away and the images like come about that way.
Got it.
Yeah, so online enticement, there's some type of online connection with that person. So whoever they've talked to has like gained their trust and gotten them to send them content. Perfect. Yeah. So like our little, at the bottom, we say online enticement includes either victims who met their perpetrator online and transmitted self-produced images, or the victims and offenders who met online and then met offline producing images. So this is, I share this data point because it's relevant to our messaging, right? This is like, we need to really, really get away from this like stranger danger in general, but stranger danger online in particular. It's not effective. We're gonna totally miss all those kids. So now let's look at the gender and age breakdown. So gender breakdown, probably not super surprising that it's about 2/3 female, but the age to me is very striking. 58% of these children are prepubescent age. What age group is that when we're talking about grades in school?
Under third.
Elementary school. How often are we talking to kids this age about any of this stuff? We're not, right? Because how do you even have that conversation? So at NCMEC, because we've seen these trends, we have created, like purposely and intentionally created resources so that people can have these conversations with this age group in a way that's age appropriate, that meets them at their level. We're not trying to scare them, we're trying to empower them, and it's not about sex, it's about boundaries, it's about things like that. So many of us, until we started working, like I've been in the child exploitation space for a long time, but I hadn't, and to be fair, like the images piece of it is relatively new for all of us, but I was always preaching and talking about like, we gotta talk about boundaries and touch and like, things like that with like, we don't make kids like hug and kiss people, all that. But I never, until I came to NCMEC, really thought about like, we need to be talking about what parts of your body are appropriate to take pictures of. When is it appropriate to live stream, to FaceTime somebody? I have an 18-month-old and my family lives on the East Coast, and when he was born, they wanted to FaceTime with us all the time. And I had to have some like boundaries, even though he was a newborn and they want to see him. But when I'm changing his diaper or I'm giving him a bath, we don't FaceTime. We'll call you back afterwards. I'm not even making it a thing. I'm just now setting these boundaries. My family knows that they can't just, they know how I feel about like posting pictures online, and they ask my permission before they do that. So things like that. Even like, I have a niece who hates, like she's not as like, she doesn't feel strongly about it now, but when she was like 4 or 5 years old and people would like force her to like sit and take a picture, she hated it. She would always get upset. And her parents would just try to force her to do it. And I'm like, okay, what are we teaching her? What are we teaching her? She should be able to be allowed to say, no, I don't want to take this picture. And we should respect that, right? It's one thing when we're forcing them to do things that have to do with their safety, but that's a little piece of agency that we can give them, because she needs to know that she has the right to say no to these things. And that if somebody is trying to pressure her into it, then that gut feeling means that like we want her to feel comfortable to come to us to say, hey, I didn't, like this happened and I didn't feel good about it, right? So that's why I share this data, because we're not having these conversations. We need to, and it's not like a blame game. It's like we're all kind of figuring this out together. So Susan talked about all of these trends. I'm going to actually talk about. I'm going to jump into talking about messaging, and I'm going to share some of the data that she kind of referenced yesterday. Some of it is from our partners at Thorn. A lot of it's from our partners at Thorn, and then I'm going to share some messaging around prevention that are going to be effective. So the way I often talk about sexting is like, well, first of all, we know, she shared yesterday, not all kids are sexting, right? More than 80% of young people are not engaging in this behavior. So that's good. That's good for us to know, because that's something we want to use when we're talking to them. And most of the time when a young person sends a nude, something bad does not happen. And we have to acknowledge that, okay? But I do see this as, you guys are laughing at me, I kind of see it as like the gateway drug to exploitation.
Yeah.
And I mean it in that, like once you start to dabble your toe in it, right, it becomes a little bit, first of all, you don't have control over what happens to your images. That's like the biggest thing. And then it can turn into something more, right? And then you become a little bit more comfortable with sending the images. Still, it's very important that we never forget that when a young person is sending their image to somebody and that person posts it online, it's the person who posted online that did something wrong. They're the ones that have violated their trust, right? They're the ones that they're showing it to other people, they have violated their trust. It's not that kid who like trusted somebody and was like trying to connect with them. I also always talk about, well, actually I'll ask you all, like why would an adult send a sext? Like why do adults engage in this behavior?
Validation.
Validation, what else?
Create interest in the relationship.
Okay.
Adult peer pressure, other adults.
Could be peer pressure, yeah. But what about like non-negative reasons? Non-negative, it's like a double negative. What about reasons that are like more, like, okay, we all probably know people who have met their spouses, the people that they married, through an online dating app, right? We all do, right? So a lot of our relationships are forming online. It's another way to be intimate with somebody and be connected with them, right? And so yes, people can be pressured into it. They could feel like that's the only way that that person's gonna like them or that they're gonna be interested in them. But it also might be like consensual and that's how they're like connecting with each other. That's how they're being intimate. And young people are engaging in this behavior for a lot of the same reasons adults are, okay? And we have to understand that because we do a lot of like, don't do that, but then like, I know people that are doing it and I'm an adult, right? So like we have this double standard and I talk about this all the time, like we expect kids to like act a certain way, but then we don't have the same expectation of adults and it's just absurd. But we have to understand where they're coming from, right? Now, the thing with being young is that your brains aren't fully developed and like you're impulsive and you're not thinking about the long-term consequences and it's our job as adults to help with those neural pathways and help them with that critical thinking and thinking about what could happen and then what would they do in those situations. So Thorne has done, and I'm going to kind of jump around with like different versions of their study, but they've done some really interesting research where they have a survey that they send out to young people between 9 and 17 years old to just find out like what are your thoughts around sexting. They call it self-generated child sexual abuse material. Sometimes they call it explicit material. There isn't really shared language around what to call it right now, so I'm just gonna call it sexy. But that's basically what they are trying to find out. And so they ask them like, what are your like have you done it? What percentage of them have done it? And what they found is pretty much it's in line for the most part with that meta-analysis that Susan shared. I like this data because it shows kind of the changes, and I think Susan mentioned this before, but some of the age groups that we're seeing that they are engaging in this behavior a lot more are young boys. Okay, so we often, when we think of this, we think of like girls, and we're like, we always think of girls, right? We're always blaming them, and then they're the ones that are engaging in this behavior, but boys are too, and we're seeing that it's happening at much younger ages. So overall, in 2021, when they updated the study, overall it was for all ages 18%. 9 to 12 it was at 14%. So it jumped from 2019 to 2021. So that's like middle school, right? We saw that we saw a little bit of a jump also for the older teens. I'm gonna jump through. We saw that it's typically a little bit higher for LGBTQ plus youth. Now, they have been like looking into the reasons behind that. I think that what's really obvious is like if we're not creating a safe environment for a young person to explore who they are, then they're gonna seek that out in other places, and sometimes online is the only safe place to do that, right? And so there's a vulnerability there, not because of that child's gender expression or gender identity or sexual orientation, but because people will take advantage of the fact that maybe they don't feel as safe or comfortable being who they are offline, right? So then they will take advantage of that. So I always like to emphasize that it's not the kid's fault. It's not like who they are that's the issue. It's the fact that people around them are not accepting of them.
Like what you said about desire to create a connection with someone, if you don't feel safe telling anybody in your own school who you are, you might create a relationship with somebody online.
Totally.
And then that is a outgrowth of that romantic relationship that may be even consensual.
Totally, exactly. And we see that a lot, right? And then the thing is, it's also like maybe you're not sure and you're literally just like trying to find out, like figuring it out. So, and that's totally, that's understandable. But people are ready to take advantage of that. So I'm gonna skip through this. Okay. So talking about their experiences with resharing. So Susan shared in that the stats that she shared about the meta-analysis that she shared. There was like 19% had sent a sext. I think like 34% had received one, and it was like a little over 14% had reshared. So this is something that we are not talking about enough. We're often telling kids, don't do it. That's typically where it stops. We're not talking to them about you shouldn't ask for it, you shouldn't pressure somebody to do it, but also like what do you do if you come across it? So I used to run groups with adolescents, and this was like 10 years ago. So this was still happening. It was like we were seeing a lot of viral videos at schools, and we had a lot of conversations about like what do you do? Your friend like shows you something that was posted online. and it's a sexual image of somebody. And you don't know if that was consensually taken or consensually shared online. What can you do in that situation? I used to talk about lowest, like easiest way to handle it is just act like you don't care. Just dismiss it. Makes it not a big deal. That person will hopefully feel a little bit stupid and not want to like share it to somebody else because they didn't get validated, like, oh, this is funny, or haha, this person's so stupid, right? And then it's like, that's low barrier. Just feel like I don't care. That's dumb. Next level is reporting it directly to the platform. No one's gonna know that you did that, but it takes a little bit more of like an effort. And then the next level is actually talking to an adult that you trust and letting them know that this is going on. And then we would talk about like, what are the, like if I'm sharing this or I'm even laughing, I'm re-victimizing somebody. And how's that person gonna feel? And how does that isolate them? And do we wanna contribute to that? So we have to be talking about that with young people. We have to be talking about that. This is from the first survey that Thorne did, and we always like to include it because some of the questions that they asked I thought were really poignant. So like one was, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, like what would make it okay to send a nude photo to somebody, right? And for most of the young people, they said it was because they trusted them or they were in a relationship with them, right? It was a very small percentage of young people didn't know the person and had no relationship with them, and they were just randomly sending the nude photo. So again, we have to understand that somebody is violating their trust when it gets out. And the reason that young people are sending this content is because they feel like they can trust that person. At that time, 60% of the youth surveys placed blame on the child. That number has gone down, which is good. It still, I think, should be much lower than it is. I can't remember what the updated stat is. But I think this is important just to be able to understand that like something bad doesn't always happen, that almost half the time the kids didn't feel bad about what they did, and about a third of the time they did. They felt shame or guilt or didn't feel good about it. So it's just understanding where young people are coming from, so when we're talking to them about these things, we can like keep that in the back of our minds and understand what their motivations are. I like this question that they asked them about what would be your reason for not sharing? Because again, we have to understand why are they not gonna share so that we can tap into that if we're trying to encourage safer and healthier behavior, right? So so what is very low is telling them that it's illegal. So we do a lot with law enforcement. Nick partners with law enforcement quite a bit, and so we do a lot of training with law enforcement, and we hear this message a lot as like kind of the primary message. And I'll be honest, like I used to highlight this too, like it's illegal, you can get in trouble for it. And it's true, it is illegal and you can get in trouble for it, but that's not the main thing that's gonna motivate them. They're most worried about it being leaked. So that's what we need to tap into, and that's what we need to talk to them about, because that is what they're actually concerned about. Okay, so I just shared some of the data, so let's talk about, how do we approach prevention? So I think Susan mentioned this, that we believe that adults must take the lead. It's never a kid's fault that they were abused or exploited. We can empower them to be able to hopefully make some safer decisions to lower their risk, but it's not on them. It's on us as adults to prevent the bad thing from happening. So I'm going to talk about some of the existing prevention messaging that we have that I also have engaged in. So I'm not going to, I have done all of this, and as we are learning as a field and we're growing, there are some new approaches that I'm going to talk through that are more effective, bottom line, if we want to change behavior. So the first one is focusing just on the sender. And we talked about this, right? If we're just talking about the person that's sending the nude photo, we're missing all the other people that are involved in this situation. The person that asked for it, the person that's sharing it, all of that. So we have to have a more robust conversation about all of our roles. And then also, if we're only focusing on the kid who sent it, then that's also victim blaming, essentially, when it gets out. So I'm not saying that we should tell kids that it's okay to send sexual, content and nude photos, but that shouldn't be our only message. And we have to be also talking about asking and sharing. What do you do when you come across it?
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
I've been curious. Do we know how many images, especially those frequently traded, that are stolen? Either hacked onto a phone or kids changing in the locker room didn't know it was being taken. Is that a major problem we're seeing, or do you think it's mostly the self-generated, intentional, I just didn't expect everybody to get it?
Well, most of what we're seeing is is CSAM. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, somebody who's like in a position of like power and trust, that's like, that's forcing them to take those photos. In terms of the other stuff, I'm not sure the answer to that, I can ask that. Usually, so the thing with our data is it's only as good as what's reported to us.
Yeah.
And so the information that we have regarding victims is based on what law enforcement is sending us. So it tends to be a little bit limited, but that's a good question.
Well, I think AI is gonna change that, or we're gonna
Yeah.
see more images that are, generated that way, but also just, I hear a lot of junior hires taking videos of other junior hires in the bathroom or in the locker room, and I just wonder how much of it is not even a power dynamic as much as a stolen image,
Yeah, which is why it's so important that we talk to kids, not just about don't send it, but also you should ask somebody their permission before you take pictures or
Don't take a
video,
picture.
right? Like you don't just do, like consent is important not
Yes.
just with sex, it's important with other aspects of our lives too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're gonna see more and more, and I think one of the consequences of AI is also gonna be people being like, oh, well, I didn't create that.
Yeah.
Or I didn't, so I think that it's like it's this new world that we're all trying to figure out how the best way to navigate.
Yeah.
So then the other message that we hear all the time is just don't do it, right? But what this does is, again, it's victim blaming, and we're not like explaining why, and we have to explain why. We want young people, like, again, their brains aren't fully developed. We have to help them with that critical thinking. Like, as adults who care about them, it's our job to like help them develop those skills. And so we want to focus on other things that they can do to connect with somebody, find out like why it is that they want to engage in this behavior, what are other ways that they can be intimate, and also talk about like what do you do if like you send a picture to somebody you really trusted and then it gets out and they do something to violate your trust. Talking through different scenarios that could happen. In the trafficking space, we often call it like safety planning. We don't have to label it that. It's just like literally just like talking through like different, just the same way we would if like we're talking to our kids about we're going to this amusement, we're going to Disneyland, and if we get separated, what's our plan? Where are we going to meet up? So talking through different scenarios and helping them figure that out. The other thing is that adolescents are going to engage in risky behavior often because it's risky behavior,
It's exciting.
right? It's exciting.
part of
Like that's what
development.
I'm sure that all of us as adults now look back to when we were teens and are like, okay, I probably wouldn't do that again, right? So that's also part of just human development, and we have to understand that too. So I already crossed this out. Using the worst case scenario. So the thing with the worst case scenario is with teens, they tend to like totally separate themselves from this. Like that would never happen to me. Like when I used to run groups with teens mostly, and I was running a trafficking prevention program, and so I was talking about trafficking, but a lot of other things that can lead to a trafficking situation, and like almost every single group, the first thing would be like, I'm not stupid, that could never happen to me, blah, 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 and they would like completely. But then as I didn't make it about them, and I would talk about, okay, well, what if like this situation happened to your friend? How would you advise them? Like, what would we want them to do? What do we want to like, how could we help them? Then they could start to kind of like separate themselves. So that's when just like tactic when you're talking to teens. The other issue with worst case scenario is little kids, like elementary school kids. If you give them a worst case scenario as an example, they're gonna be confident that worst case scenario is gonna happen to them, and then they're gonna be totally freaked out. So we don't want to paralyze a child with fear either, right? We want to empower them to make healthy decisions and know who to go to if something is happening that makes them feel uncomfortable or unsafe. We want to teach them how to like listen to that gut. So we also want them to be able to see, we talk about this internally a lot, like kind of the gray area. So like when we talk about like healthy relationships, we often talk about like the red flags, like the things that are super obviously like a bad situation in a relationship. But we don't talk about the little things that like make us feel like that not feel good. But it's not super clear. Like I think we can all think about people who are like in these relationships that are really unhealthy, but it's not like the person is like cheating on them or punching them in the face, but they're not making them feel good, right? So we want them to be able to see that it's not always just the worst case scenario. There are all these other things that could lead to like a dangerous and risky situation. So helping them think through that. Did you guys all do the DARE program?
Yes.
Yeah. So have you guys heard that like what we probably all went through was not effective? So they totally revamped the program to make it more like developmentally appropriate and actually focus on empowering people and helping them make healthier decisions to reduce their risk. The other tactic is talking only to teens. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, right? Like we're seeing that younger kids are being targeted. And so if we're waiting until they're teens, it's like, well, it's never too late to talk to kids, but like we should be starting earlier because we know that they can be targeted, we can be victimized earlier. And we talk to them in an age-appropriate way. Susan, I've like stolen this from her, but like an analogy she always gives is to car seat safety. So when we bring our kids home from the hospital, it is our job to make sure that they are in that car seat correctly, right? It's terrifying, you second guess yourself, all that stuff. My husband and I got into a fight like as we're leaving the hospital because we were stressed out about the car seat, but it's our responsibility. And then as my son gets older, it's still my responsibility to make sure he's in there correctly. Now he'll start to resist me, he'll try to unbuckle, so it's my job to make sure that I'm saying to him why he needs to be in the car seat. I even have him be a part of buckling himself in, be engaged in that process. If we start driving and he unbuckles himself, I have to pull the car over, stop it, buckle him back in, and explain to him why he has to be buckled in, right? It's my job, it's my responsibility. As he gets older, he'll be able to get himself in there. He'll start driving. I'm not gonna take him out driving one time and be like, all right, here are the keys, you're good. We're gonna drive together a lot, right? Until he's then can go on his own. And then once he goes on his own, I'm still gonna be reminding him about different safety things. That's how we should be approaching internet safety and these relationships we have with people in general, right? But especially internet safety. We can't just stop at like one conversation when they're 16. Oh, you could be sextorted. Whoa. What are all these other things that could happen, right? So, and then the other thing that I say is like, and this is just like, we say, we've kind of taken this from the child sexual abuse prevention space, is like, you want to have the conversations early and often. It's not just good for the kids, it's good for us as the adults, because then we start to work that muscle. We become more comfortable talking about it so that we're not having this one-time awkward conversation when they're 15. It's like, okay, this is the culture of our classroom, this is the culture of our school, this is the culture of our family, that we are going to have these conversations, and I'm going to fix my face, watch my reaction, and really be here to like listen, hear where you're coming from, and actually care what you think. Focusing on strangers, I already talked about this, right? We're totally missing the ball if we talk about only strangers. It's not even that. The thing is also like, even if I as an adult might see somebody who's only has an online relationship with somebody who's only had that online relationship for like 2 months, I see that person's like a stranger, that might be like that young person's like best friend for real, right? Like we talked about this earlier, that might be their community, that might be where they're connecting with people. And so we have to be understanding of that, and also we just live in a world where like that's, our relationships are like that. Like I stay in touch with a lot of people because a lot of my family and friends are not in California. And so my relationships, a lot of my relationships are virtual. And that's the world that we live in. And that's not the important part. I don't think kids are necessarily, or humans honestly, are that much better about like reading somebody in person versus online. It's about the relationship. We need to be talking about characteristics of a healthy relationship. What does it mean to be in a healthy romantic relationship and friendship? Because a lot of these, when we're talking about exploitation, often starts off as friendship as well. So it's not just strangers. Thorne did, in 2017, they did a study on just specifically sextortion, and they found that 60% of the kids had an offline relationship with the person who sextorted them. Now, we anticipate, I was actually just looking at some more recent studies, and it's in line. We anticipate that this might change a little bit because of the spike in financial sextortion. But however, like at NCMEC, the reports that, like what NCMEC sees is one perspective of what's happening, right? Because the reality is, if my boyfriend is sextorting me, I'm probably not going to report that to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, right? So NCMEC is probably not going to have that kind of data on that like interpersonal relationship or somebody I have like a familial relationship with who's doing that to me. Okay, so the best defense is communication and conversation. And so we have an internet safety program. It's called NetSmarts. I have a one-pager on the table along with like samples of lots of different NetSmarts materials. It's free, and we have content for kindergarten through 12th grade. And I guess I don't have the slide in there that I usually have a slide. So it's the way that it's set up is there's different components to it. It's not a curriculum. We have presentations that you can download. They're age specific. And so we have we have a lower elementary, upper elementary, middle school, high school, and then a parent and caregiver one. When you download it, there's a script on what to say. It's ready to go. Almost everything's in English and in Spanish. And so it really is easy to implement in a school setting or in a group setting. Often school staff will use the presentations, or they'll invite like external folks to come in and do those presentations. And we've got a lot of partners in the area that are more than happy to do it for free. But it's a great way to start having these conversations about internet safety in a way that's going to be appropriate and relatable. So Susan mentioned that we've seen this really big jump and spike in sextortion cases, and so we've been trying to create some new content around that. And this is one of our newest videos that literally was released 3 weeks ago, and it's called Sextortion is the name of the video. I'm gonna play it.
Let's go! Get your head in the game! Come on, Nico, hustle up!
Yo, Nico! Dude, why are you smiling like that?
Hey! Come on now, this girl just messaged me.
Why does she look so familiar?
I checked. She's also friends with Alex, Drew, and...
Mateo.
Yeah, he probably wasn't her type. Quick, what should I say next?
You should block her next.
What? No, man, you're crazy.
I thought I was with Mateo, but then I heard what happened to him.
Oh man, no, this is different.
Nico, she's not real. Mateo also thought she was super cute and sent her the photos she wanted. But as soon as he did, they demanded money, threatening him to show the whole school those pics. I think it's called sextortion. You remembered what happened next, right?
This can't be happening to me.
No, man, this is different. I checked, we have friends in common.
Let me guess. She said something like, if you show me yours, I'll show you mine.
What the? Oh, I'll just tell her no.
She'll keep pressuring you if you message her. Here. First, we'll block their account and report them on the app and to the cyber tip line. Then, you should change your profile name, but do not delete your account. Don't worry, you can take control back.
Thanks, Luis.
You can thank me later, after I beat you on this field.
Take back control. Talk to a trusted adult. Visit nicmec.org/sextortion.
So we developed this. It's 3 videos that we've been working on. 2 of them came out 3 weeks ago, and then we have another one that's coming out in the next few weeks about healthy relationships. So we did develop these in collaboration with survivors, and got their feedback when we were writing the script and all along the way, and really wanted to make sure that we were, often when we talk about crimes of sexual exploitation and sexual violence, the victim is almost always portrayed as being female. And so it's really important that we're like making it clear that it can be a guy, or male identifying young person, and kind of showing those examples of what that looks like. And the reality is with the financial sextortion spike, like it's primarily males that are being targeted. So we're gonna have discussion guides that come along with that too. So the way the NetSmarts program is we've got the presentations, we have a whole bunch of different videos. I'm not gonna show them all, but we have one called Your Photo Fate that's about sexting. These are some of the questions that go along with the discussion guide for that. So Your Photo Fate and it's called Sextortion Video. Those are more for like middle school and high school audiences. And then we have a video series called Into the Cloud. This is for elementary school. So this is when I said we created some new content specifically for elementary school. This is what I'm talking about. It's for K through 5, and there's 2 seasons of Into the Cloud. Each season is 6 episodes, and the episodes are short, like 5-6 minutes. The first season is like really foundational internet safety, and the second season is actually about a sextortion situation. I'm gonna show a clip.
Zion, what are you doing here?
Oh, hi, Webster.
Hey,
What's wrong?
Go ahead, Zion. You can tell them. They're NetSmart's kids. They might know a way to help.
Okay, so remember how I showed you some of my pins? Well, like I said, that was only some of them. I've got tons. I have a whole video channel dedicated to them. I do unboxings, ratings, cleanings, stuff like that. But I also stream myself playing video games. I've got a good number of followers. Sometimes they're playing the same game as me, and we work together on a level. Or I do a live stream and people message to ask for tips or tricks. Just normal stuff like that. But then, the other day, I got this direct message from someone in the game chat. I didn't recognize the username, but they said they had a picture of me. A really embarrassing picture of me doing something I probably shouldn't have done on livestream. But I was just goofing off. I only mooned the camera because my followers dared me to. They said it'd be funny, so I did it. And this person had a screenshot picture of it. They said they'd send it to all of my followers if I didn't send him 10,000 goldies. You've got to be really good to get goldies.
Okay. So as you can see, it's not about sex. It's about something that a 7 or 8 year old would, like, I think a high school student would do this, right? They think it's funny to
Yeah.
moon the camera, right?
Yeah.
And then how something very innocent could very quickly kind of spiral into something really scary for that kid. And we actually wrote this, and I'm saying we, but didn't write the script, my colleagues did. When the script was written, it was before we saw this big jump of financial sextortion cases, actually. But we were seeing that gaming, that kids were being targeted in gaming, and that this is something that happened. So that's where that kind of storyline came from. But it's very relevant to what we're seeing now. And then we've got discussion guides. So each episode has a discussion guide that goes along with it. So what I always recommend for schools, especially like elementary schools, is to do the NetSmarts presentation and then use Into the Cloud throughout the school year. So like you can do it in the fall, you can do season 1, in the spring you can do season 2. Every week for 6 weeks. It's short, they're short episodes. You can do them in PE, health class, the technology class, wherever you can kind of fit it in. The school counselor can facilitate. It just depends on your school and like who's able to kind of adjust the curriculum, because I know with teachers it's like really hard to fit it into their regular instructional day. So there's a lot of different ways to incorporate this into the school programming. Other resources we have through NetSmarts, we have tip sheets. So this is one of the tip sheets I have printed out. This is for teens. This one is for parents and caregivers about sextortion. I don't have this one with me. Everything can be printed from our website. Sextortion posters, I have some here. And then if you want to request any for your schools or in your programs, we're happy to send them to you. Everything is free. We have some trusted adult resources, some resources about asking for help. And then Thorn, I don't have time to show this video, but if you've seen it, they have a really cool video about sextortion. So I recommend watching it. It's really funny. They also have a cool site called No Filter where where people can take quizzes, and there's like different scenarios. There's really good, really great short videos of like young people having conversations with each other and their parents about lots of different topics that are kind of related to this. So, and then so from the NCMEC side, in addition to what I shared with NetSmarts, we can help get content taken down. And so there's kind of 3 different things that I share. One is reporting to the cyber tip line. That's really where we can provide the most comprehensive response and support. However, it is not anonymous. Every single cyber tip is shared with law enforcement. But if NCMEC is involved, there is so much we can do. First of all, if a young person self-reports, we are going to reach out to them directly and we're going to say, hey, these are all the different things that we can do to help you. This is what the process is. We can get them connected with supports. We can help them with navigating, telling their family, their caregivers. And then we can also provide that emotional support to their parents or caregivers. Because as a parent, your kid goes through this, you have a lot of feelings and they're valid. You're upset, you're mad, you're ashamed, you feel guilty, like so many feelings, totally valid feelings, right? But in order to fully show up for your kid in a way so that they can heal, you gotta work through your own stuff. And so we can provide that support. We have a lot of resources we can share. We also work with the tech companies to help prevent that circulation. So remember I said there's a lot we can do, we can get in front of it. we will take the digital fingerprint, the hash value of that image or video, and we will add it to a hash sharing list with the tech companies that we work with. And then they can be proactive and scan their sites and remove content if it pops up and prevent it from circulating. So that's really cool. And yeah, so this is, and then the other thing is like young people again are scared. But what I would say, if something is already circulating online, it's a very likely it's going to end up across the desk of the police. And if NCMEC is involved, then we have control over who it gets sent to. So it'll get, when we send the cyber tips, we're sending it to the ICAC, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. They are specially trained, and if they know, and they know us, we have a very close relationship with them. If they know we're involved and that we're advocating for this young person, the response is going to be it'll be different than if it goes to some random school resource officer that doesn't have this kind of training, right? Then it's like, then you don't know what you're gonna get. You get somebody who's super understanding, you get somebody who feels like being punitive is the way to like change behavior, so we don't know, yeah.
So specifically, our school district right now, if there's a question of child sexual abuse materials, they call our local police. Are you suggesting that we call NCMEC instead?
I mean, I'm suggesting that a cyber tip line report is definitely made.
Uh-huh.
Because then we will, so if that happens, then it'll get sent to LA ICAC, and then Orange County Sheriff's Department is an affiliate of LA ICAC. Mm-hmm. And so are some of the other, like Laguna Beach, like there's all these other local agencies, mm-hmm. and so we can help with making sure it's getting routed to the right folks.
Uh-huh. If it hasn't been shared on the internet, if it's just taken on like a device, mm-hmm. and our local law enforcement says, I think it's, our conclusion is it's just on this device, hasn't been shared. Do you think there's a need to report at all?
Still send it to us, because we still can take that digital fingerprint and just share it with the tech companies, just in case somebody decides to be a jerk and put it online. Right? So it's a way to be proactive.
Right. Thanks.
So definitely report to cyber tip line. Yeah. So again, I know it's really scary to report to the cyber tip line. So we also have instructions on how to report directly to the platforms on our website. So if they go to get help, is there explicit content out there, reporting companies, and we have links to some of the most popular platforms on how do you report through the app, but also like on the web-based version of the platform. So that's another option. And then last year, we launched a new program called Take It Down. And this is an anonymous service for kids to report content that they created of themselves. This is not third-party reporting. So if I know about something that's circulating, I report to the cyber tip line, or I can report directly to the platform. Take It Down is for that kid that created the content themselves, and it's on their own device. They can report it here, even if they're not sure if it's circulating online. So they just send it to somebody, and now that person's giving them that not good feeling, I can't trust them anymore, they can be proactive, and what we do is we will then share immediately. That hash value will be added to the hash share list for the companies who are participating in this program, and then they can be proactive on their sites. Now, we want it for the original, we want a couple things. We don't upload the picture. What we do is we just take that digital fingerprint, that hash value, which is like a serial number. That's what we take. And so we want it to be of the original photo that's being shared. So a screenshot will have a totally different digital fingerprint than the actual photo that's being shared online. So don't screenshot a story and then do that, okay? But if anybody has questions, they can always reach out to us. The other thing is because this is anonymous, we're not collecting any personal information, we can't do any follow-up with that kid. So once, there's no way for them to find out, did this show up on any platform or anything like that. There's nothing we can do. That's the only way we can make it anonymous. Like I said, we can provide support to victims and to their caregivers. We have a peer-to-peer support program. The cool thing about our family advocacy services is that they're completely free, and there doesn't need to be an active case for somebody to access these services. So let's say you have a young person that you're working with a year ago, they experienced trafficking or exploitation, or maybe they were running away and family's still having a really hard time, or kids still really having a hard time. You can refer that family to us, and we can still provide support services, even though whatever the incident is in the past. We also have a network of providers that we can make referrals out to. It's called our Family Advocacy Outreach Network. They have agreed, they're mental health providers and community service providers that have agreed to provide free or low cost services to the folks we refer to them. We have free online trainings. I think Susan mentioned this yesterday, so definitely check out Inmate Connect. And then if you work with a nonprofit organization or interested in doing NetSmarts programming, we love to partner with local organizations and school districts, and honestly, we do it with some like law enforcement agencies too. But basically, we train up anyone that would be facilitating NetSmart. Like our program is free; all the resources are on our website. But we provide like a hands-on training. It's like 2 half days of like prevention principles. How do you talk about these things? How do you handle disclosure? And then we walk through the presentations. So it's just like more in-depth technical assistance. It's free, but there is like an application process, and I have some flyers on that in the back. That's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I did go over, I'm sorry.